I just finished replacing the front shocks on this E320 4matic wagon. It was a bear of a job. You're looking at one of the old shocks here, and if you notice, it doesn't look like any other shock you have probably seen, and that's one of the reasons why this job was so difficult. I wish that I would have filmed riding in this car before I started the job, because it was really bad. The owner said, hey, it just doesn't feel right. And he says, it's kind of bouncing a lot. And I went, of course, and checked it out. Take a look here. As I take you back a few days ago when we brought it to the shop, can you believe how much bounce we were experiencing out of the front end? It was like the shocks were totally shot. I mean, totally shot. There's nothing there but a little bit of spring pressure inside. And then I took it back out just before I brought it into this lift for the final inspection. I did a test drive, and now look at how the shocks can be demonstrated using that push-down test. Now I want you to watch closely as I do the same test that I did previously. We're going to start rocking this car up and down like this. Notice it's still bouncing, but I'm going to release it and watch what happens. Now it came up and it stopped and it maybe just moved a half an inch. Watch again. It didn't rebound up and down a couple more times after letting go. The other thing is I'm panting, pushing up and down on it. I can feel the difference. So a couple weeks ago when I was approaching doing this job, I wanted to see what information was available on the internet to replace the front shocks on a 4matic W210. What I found out was there was a lot of confusing information, particularly on the forums. People were saying, well, it's really easy. Well, they were talking about a sedan, and the people who own sedans didn't understand the huge difference between the front shock absorbers in the wagons and just in the sedan. So you had these conflicting reports. Oh, it's easy. It only cost me $65 to replace the shock. And some other guys said, what do you mean? I got a quote for $800. So you need to make sure you know what you're talking about and who you're talking to. Even some of the parts houses I found on the internet were listing wagon shocks the same as the sedans. And you're thinking, well, I heard these were like $150 a piece, and I found so-and-so website or such and such a place on eBay, they're only 80 bucks. Yahoo! You know, and then they'd order them and find out, wow, that doesn't look like anything like the shock absorber I have on my station wagon. So it became obvious that there was a lot of misinformation on the internet, plus there was a lot of lack of information on how to DIY this job. Because if you were to take this into a shop, the labor alone would be anywhere from probably $600 to $800 today. And of course the shocks, if you can buy them right, you might get them for $150 to $160 a piece. So you're looking at close to $1,000 here to replace the front shocks on this car, and that can literally freak an owner out. And of course that's why they end up on the internet. Isn't there a cheaper way to do it? So I started thinking, is there a way that I could show a DIYer, in his garage or at home, how to replace these shock absorbers without spending a lot of money. And after doing this, I said, this is not a beginner DIY job. It's even not an intermediate DIY job. This is really an advanced DIY job. And I'm not going to tell you anything about doing this job on YouTube, because I don't want somebody trying this job if they really don't have the experience working on front ends. And for one thing, without a lift, you're going to be jacking the car up and down a lot because you have to pressurize the suspension, then unpressurize it, then pressurize it again. So having a lift to be able to move the car up and down on and off the wheels, that's right, on and off the wheels while doing this, makes the job a lot easier. So what I decided to do is I did do some filming during this process. So in this YouTube video, I just want to warn you first off that unless you have the experience, the tools, and know-how, it doesn't take a lot of expensive special equipment, but the spring compressor is critical, and I'm going to do a separate video on my website, which I will show you which spring compressor I used and where I was able to obtain it. It does cost less than $80, but it's a spring compressor that's very safe to use. You do not want to use any of these cheap, McPherson strut spring compressors. And of course, the Mercedes factory disc spring compressor doesn't work here because there's a shock absorber. This shock absorber, which goes right down through the center of the spring, and that is really what makes this job so difficult. So if you're faced with bad shock absorbers on your W210 4matic and you want to look at what it may require to do this job, then I would recommend that you check my video out on my website. I'll just go ahead and put a link in the show more part of this description below. But don't even consider doing this job if you're a beginner DIYer.